All right. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. And indeed, I am a past examiner. I actually was an examiner the year that Annaliese sat. And so just to let you know, I am not privy to anything that's happening with the exam this year. That is the condition of me being able to actually speak to you, so I cannot accidentally disclose anything. So I guess I don't represent the official college position at this point. I've come to talk to you as someone who's been on the other side of the desk, if you like, as an examiner, and hopefully give you some insight into that process that will be helpful as you prepare for the exam. And so Annaliese and I will do a little bit of a double act. We'll talk about the way the exam works, and then a little bit about, from both our perspectives, the tips in how to make it work for you and how to demonstrate that you're a fabulously competent public health physician, which is what we're hoping to see from everybody. So I am pleased to tell you that I was able to get the college to tell me what the exam dates are for this year, which have just been confirmed, I understand. Now, who's planning to sit this year? Okay, so quite a lot of you. Excellent. All right, so we're looking at the end of October, and you get your results about a month later, and formal applications open in August. And just a note to say that these deadlines are, I believe, very strict, so you need to be on time. So I'm sure you know all of this because you will be completely familiar with the handbook and all the details, but pretty much the most important thing to know is you've got to have everything finished by 31st of July in order to sit. And these are obviously just all the different things that you need to have ticked off and finished. And I suggest if you've got any queries about that process, you speak to your supervisor sooner rather than later. Do you want to say anything about that, Annaliese? Or not really?
No, just from personal experience, just get it sorted. They're looking at you. It's really easy to forget to do that kind of stuff, especially if you're working in a busy job. So just especially for some of those, professional qualities, reflections, and it doesn't have to be a big thing to do. Just have to do it. So just get it done ASAP. There's nothing like putting that stress on yourself and then your supervisor will inevitably be overseas or someone will be on leave and then someone. So just try and get it done.
Yeah. Do you want to say
I might just
something?
throw in one thing. The only one on there that might be a bit of a challenge is the workplace report. And there are certain deadlines throughout the year, and you do sometimes see people waiting to the very last deadline. And if you fail that workplace report, you then can't sit the exam. So I think we've probably missed the last deadline for this year. It's today. So missing the exam this year, you may have to rush off and go and do it straight away. But for future years, don't leave those workplace reports till the last minute.
Okay, that's good advice. Okay. The why and the what of the exam. So, as you all know, this is an oral examination and it's a summative assessment. And we really want to see that you have good knowledge and understanding of important public health issues as per your training curriculum. And really, we want to see that you can analyse the situation systematically and present a coherent argument in a face-to-face situation. And Annaliese and I were just having a chat about the fact that this is the absolute reality of daily public health practice, is you don't know what's going to be on the front of the newspaper tomorrow that you're going to be asked to deal with. And that being able to systematically approach a new problem, even when you may have zero technical knowledge about that, is a fundamental public health skill. Bringing those principles of practice and systematic and evidence-based thinking to the way you approach problems and deal with new policy issues is really fundamental. And yes, it is a bit stressful and difficult having to quickly organise your thoughts and put them together in a coherent way, but that is also a skill that you're going to need, because you're going to be asked to brief the minister tomorrow, or you're going to be asked to speak to the media about an outbreak that just happened 2 hours ago. So it is actually a really useful skill. And of course, some of us, it comes to us very naturally, we can talk the leg off a horse. Some of us find a lot more stressful trying to do that. So really the top tip here is practice, practice, practice. We know that you guys have got the skills. We know you've got the experience from your training. And what the examiners are looking for is we want to pass you. We want you to show us in your answers that you are a competent, organised public health practitioner who is going to go out there and do a fabulous job. So remember, it's your job to convince us of that. We're looking to give you marks. We're looking to see that you've got across the question and that you can be organised. So practice, practice, practice. The other thing to say is that the style of it is that we will give you a problem and we will invite you to tell us about your approach to it, but we will also interact with you. So we will probe you. We will ask you, well, can you tell me a little bit more about this? And you need to remember that we're doing that for your benefit. We're usually doing it because, hopefully because you're doing really, really well and we think you know more about this and we want to hear about it. We want to give you extra marks. Or maybe you've just skated over something that means, you know, you probably know about this, but we really need you to tell us a little bit more for us to give you the full marks for it. So don't see it as, oh my God, I'm failing. Why are they asking me these things? I'm doing really badly and fall in a heap. See it as a further opportunity to display your knowledge and what you know about something. So it's really a tool that the examiners are using to try and interact and make sure they clearly understand what you're trying to say. Annaliese, do you want to comment on that? The experience of having to put those answers together and try and express them clearly in a stressful situation.
Yeah, but I might let you get through the
get through
first.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe have a bit,
a bit more of a chat.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so in terms of the actual format, you will be given 8 questions that you'll be given obviously before you're asked to talk about them, and that you will present in 2 30-minute sessions with 2 different panels of examiners. And there is a changeover time between those 2 sessions as well. Within each panel, you'll do 4 of the questions, and you'll be able to choose what order you want to answer the questions in. And I think people choose to do these in different ways. You might choose to do the questions that you feel really comfortable with, the things that you did last week at work and you're totally across how you deal with a measles outbreak. I'm going to start with that. It's going to give me confidence. Or you might decide to do the really tricky environmental health question that you're really not sure about first to get it out of the way and shine as you go through. So it'll be up to you to think a little bit about strategically about how you might approach that. And you'll also find that some of the questions will be short and some of them will be longer. So all of those things will, I think, help you win. It's totally up to you which order you attack the questions in. So this is an oh yeah, sure, sorry.
Just check, is it totally up to the candidate to be managing their time? Will, for example, with the probing and questioning from the examiners keep in mind the time, or is it your responsibility as the candidate to kind of wrap things up?
It is a sort of dual responsibility. So you are allowed to take like a watch in there so that you know where you're up to, and we will certainly do our best to make sure you're not going ridiculously over time on one question and have 5 minutes left for the last 3 questions. So yes, we will assist you with that, and we're not going to ask you if you're running out of time long probing questions, absolutely. So we'll do our best to support you in your time management, but yes, it is actually up to you more than anyone else. Okay, so you will be given the questions and have 45 minutes pre-reading time. And in that time, you're probably going to be pulling those questions apart, thinking about what frameworks you're going to use, thinking about what the key things that you really need to cover in those questions are, and writing some notes about that. And you'll be able to take the questions and your notes into the exam to refer to. You will have your first, when you walk into the room, there'll be your panel of 3 examiners, and the examiners actually take turns being the lead with the different candidates, and somebody will be responsible for scribing your answers, but most examiners will also be taking notes as they go, and they're doing that because each question will have a sort of framework answer, and they'll be wanting to check that you're getting across most things. Now, that said, This is not an exam where there is a yes, no checklist. You absolutely have to do everything and otherwise you fail. Sometimes amazing candidates will attack a problem completely differently to anybody else. They may have different knowledge about it, they may take a different focus, and they can still score really highly. So if you're an expert in one particular question, you might get across the key elements of a framework really fast and then spend the rest of the time talking about, I don't know, how you would deal with one particular aspect of it. Those are actually, that's not a bad thing. And sometimes you can score really highly by doing that. So the examiners will take notes, but don't let that put you off. That they're doing that to try and make sure we record accurately, that we're assessing everybody fairly. We want to see key elements, but if you can take us further in certain areas, that is another way of, I think, really impressing the examiners. You'll also find that there's usually an observer in the room, and there is also a quality person in the room. And so the idea of that is we want to make sure that all procedures are followed correctly. And that can include things like making sure the probing is reasonable, making sure that candidates are all treated fairly. And so we do have someone there for your benefit who'll be observing, and someone who'll be checking the consistency of the questioning and so forth. So as well as the 3 examiners, there may be another 2 people in the room. You can just ignore them. They're there for you though. Once you've done the first lot, you've got a changeover period where you'll be taken to a different room. You can use the toilet if you need to, and you can look over your questions and your notes in that period. And then you do your final 30 minutes, and that will be in a different room with a different set of different 3 examiners. Then at the end of the exam sessions, there could be some candidates who are borderline, and that is they're very close to either passing or failing, and you may, if you're in that situation, be offered a supplementary exam, which will happen usually the next day. And that's all technical. You don't need to worry about it for the moment, but that's, the college will tell you when you book your airfare, if you're interstate, to book a flexible one for that reason, because it can and does happen sometimes. And again, that supplementary exam is about us trying to find out more about you. You're getting another chance to demonstrate that you are competent and you can clearly explain stuff to us. So it's about giving you another opportunity if you're somewhere close to that borderline. So it's not punitive, it's actually, again, it's for you. Yep.
Sorry, can I just clarify? So with the supplementary notification letter, so I always thought that was for people who maybe just fell under the line. But what you're saying also, it's also for people who are only just scraping over the line?
I think, look, I'm not actually clear on that. I think it is if you're right on the border. So yeah, yes, it probably is people who will fail by 1 or 2 points. Yeah. So it's not if you're, comfortably going to make it over, you're not going to get it.
Passed or you failed.
Yeah, that's right. Correct. So it's the people who are right on that edge, not people who've clearly failed or clearly passed. Yeah. Again, that's kind of a technical question for the college, really, rather than me. Okay.
And the other interesting thing about that is the year that I sat, they said something, they worded it like, you may wish to come back on this date at this time to see if you require a supplementary exam. It was posed as an optional thing. So we all rocked up at the time, and then they made us sit there and wait for like nearly an hour, wait for everyone to turn up. We're saying, but you didn't tell us we had to turn up. There will be people who don't want to turn up, who maybe just, don't want to know or don't want to sit a supplementary exam or what have you. In the end, we convinced them to give us our bloody envelopes because we wanted to get out of there. But by which point, still not everybody had turned up for that. So if you can, just turn up, because your colleagues will be potentially sitting around waiting for you to turn up before they get their supplementary or no supplementary letters.
And I guess if you're not going to do that, let the college know beforehand. All right.
Very weird.
Yeah, that is a bit weird. Okay, we've sort of talked about this a little bit already, but in terms of what sort of questions you'll be asked to apply your knowledge to usually a particular scenario or an issue. rather than recall of factual knowledge. And that's not to say that we don't like it if you happen to have the knowledge and you can tell us what the incubation period is or the lethal dose is or the, refer to the relevant legislation by type. If you can do that, tell us, show us that you understand in your jurisdiction or how that actually works on the ground, because we really love to hear that. But it's not necessary, and that's the point really. As long as you can convince us that you will know who to ask, who to engage, who to work with, how to work with them to solve a particular public health problem, that's really what we're fundamentally looking for. Anyone who can give us lots of factual detail and examples from the real world is probably going to score extra. But at heart, it's really about knowing that you're going to be a safe public health practitioner and you're going to have a systematic approach to issues.
So an example of that is in Simon's year, the communicable disease question was on Q fever. Who's ever managed a Q fever case, let alone a Q fever outbreak?
Yeah.
So the vast majority of people in that exam will never have dealt with Q fever at all, but I would still say the vast majority have passed because they have their frameworks sorted out. So I don't think I'd ever heard of the chemical that we're investigating in my environmental question, but it's the same. Claire would probably know what it was, but it's the same principle. Use your principles so try not to, that's one of the biggest things for exam prep is, and volume of practice is that ideally you will get good at not becoming flustered when you come across something that you don't know what it is. That makes sense, because it's going to happen. Almost certainly it will happen.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously I think you're all aware that, the questions are going to go across the curriculum. So you're likely going to have an environmental health question, you're going to have a health promotion question, you're going to have an Aboriginal health question. So I'm sure everyone's aware of that they really need to have in their minds what are the fundamentals of answering that type of question so that you're ready. And you don't need to state, I'm going to use blah and blah's framework, but you just need to make sure you're applying it systematically. And again, using it as your own checklist so you don't forget an essential element like communication or whatever because you're so caught up in the detail of all the other things you're doing to investigate the particular problem. So it's, I guess it's for you as it is, as much for you as it is for the examiners. So what are the examiners looking for? This is just a list that the college provides around the fundamentals. And I think it's worth saying that I've been an examiner once and I have to say it's incredible time investment that's asked of us, not nearly as much as you, obviously, but it's taken incredibly seriously. We spend most of a year developing, testing, evaluating the questions, throwing them around. We actually have a workshop very close to the exam where we make sure that we're scoring consistently with video feedback, etc., etc. So we take this incredibly seriously, and in our conceptual answers that we're looking for, we will have in our mind the range of candidates that we're probably going to see, from people who've done this exact scenario in real life through to people who've never, for example, worked in that particular area. So the framework, the core answers we'll be looking for will be fundamental principles-based, framework-based answers that we want you to tell us how you're going to manage this in the fundamentals of your framework, and then we'll be giving, I guess, extra marks or weighting better candidates who can go beyond that, who we want to see you explaining things clearly, structured, giving us examples, interacting with us when we're asking you questions, and all of that's going to give us an overall impression and help contribute to your score, which is out of 10 for each question. All the questions are weighted equally, but as I said, some of them are longer. And usually if there's a two-part question, we'll tell you whether you should apply equal time to each part of the question or if one is weighted higher than the other. So that will help to guide you in how much detail you need to do in each part. You need an overall average of 6 out of 10 for each question to pass. You can obviously bring your average up if you not great on one question, but you get 9 or 10 on another. That's going to help you out. But if you get 4 or lower on 2 or more questions, that's an automatic fail. So, all right. And I just thought, this is just an exercise I thought we might do, but maybe we can leave it till after Annaliese's.
Maybe I'll have a chat and then.
Yeah, I thought we might just throw around what we think. If we were the examiners, what would be the topics that we would write in this year's exam just to help everyone with their study?
So, I am not nearly as organised as Julia and do not have any slides for you, but I've just written down some of the things that I found that I think worked well for me in my study year. And I suppose to reiterate a few of the things that Julia said, this, they're not looking to fail you here. This is not one of those ridiculous surgical or, pathology exams where 40% of people must fail. They want to pass you. And it is an eminently passable exam if you are smart about the way that you study, but it does need a lot of study. You will get varying reports about how much you need to study to pass this exam. Somebody I saw, which some of you may have seen on a Facebook exam, said she studied 4 hours a day, something or other else crazy on the weekends for a year and a half before the exam. That was not me. I did not study anywhere near that much. However, by this point in the year, by June, I was doing questions already. So I suppose I'll go through in order. Get a group. It's really important. This is not something that you can do on your own. You need to have study buddies. They don't have to be in the room with you. So the year I sat, there was one other Victorian trainee sitting. We studied together. We were working together for some of the time and not for other parts of the year. So we did stuff on Skype, and I know lots of other groups have done Skype sessions. We did some stuff. We did some sessions at work when we were working together, which were very kindly run by Simon because he wasn't an examiner that year. And then I also had a second study group with friends in Western Australia, actually. So Saturday mornings from about July, August, every Saturday we did increasing numbers of questions together and went over frameworks and did study together. And that was really great because, like Julia was touching on, I was government to the core, sitting at 50 Lonsdale Street, had been there for the last 18 months, had done the vast majority of the rest of my training in government-based jobs in WA. They had done all of their training in Broome, in Aboriginal communities, general practice and academic type public health. Neither of them, or one of them had done a little bit of time at the Broome Public Health Unit, but other than that, neither of them had done anything government, neither of them had managed any sort of outbreaks before, any of the policy stuff, any of that kind of stuff, but I'd done almost no Aboriginal health. So if you can find people like that, that's really useful because those sort of complementary skill sets will get each other through the exam. Thinking on volume, for me, we started probably about January, February doing just weekly sessions with my study buddy here and then some sessions with another public health physician in doing exam type questions. So we were doing like 1 or 2 exam type questions every week or couple of weeks from quite early on. And I can't stress that enough. You must not wait until September or August to start doing questions. You will be shit at them. You will be rubbish at them. I can tell you until July, August, maybe even September, I was probably failing just about every question that I did, but you cannot get good at them without doing them. So yes, you need to study all of the content. Yes, you need to get your framework sorted, all of that stuff, but you need to do the questions and you need to do them over and over and over and over again and out loud and to time. And assume that early on you will take a lot longer, but it is one of those volumatic things that the more times you do it, the better you will get at it. So the things that worked well for me, writing lists. I wrote a lot of lists. I had a lot of tick boxes, lists of which frameworks I had sorted, which frameworks I didn't have sorted. I was still jigging around some of my frameworks till the week before the exam, but at least having a basic framework down pat for all of the things that I thought I needed to have a framework. And I was still, as things came up, still writing new frameworks for some things quite late in the piece as other things came up that we thought, oh, I hadn't considered that. So things like some of the questions around health systems and quality improvement and that kind of thing is starting to become a little bit more on vogue than it had been before. So, if something comes up that you've not come across before, for me, what I found useful was to write myself at least some sort of framework so that if it came up again in the exam, I could be systematic about it. I am not one of those people who can make something up on the spot and for it to come out and sound coherent. I needed to have those dot points, at least a couple of dot points to work around in that 2 or 4 minute section of that particular question. I had lists of topics, so it's handy to have. You need to have some content knowledge around certain things, and at least just to read up on, so you had an idea around things. Because if you've read an article or two about something and a question comes up about it, it will come back to you and it will help you. So just try to get your head around certain big picture policy things or things that are going on in the public health space, climate change, emergency management stuff, antimicrobial resistances. The climate change and AMR are big on people's radars at the moment, but other things like the new cervical screening guidelines. Somebody sent me an article about the new stuff that was about to be implemented. Must have been literally the week before the exam. And I had my screening framework and we'd done lots of screening questions, but somebody sent this fantastic 2-page explainer of the new program, and it was literally, I think, aimed at general practitioners. It was written by an O&G. And we got that question. It was amazing. I was like, it was like I pretty much just regurgitated this article that had been sent to me. It was, so every now and then you'll get lucky. So lists of topics to just at least have a bit of peripheral awareness of. The other thing that I found lists of useful was examples. So in certain frameworks, you will need to just bang out examples of things. So, particularly the health promotion Ottawa Charter thing, examples of this kind of policy, examples of this, examples of this. So having just 4 or 5 examples across a range of topics that are likely to come up in that area. So examples of things across Aboriginal health, smoking, nutrition, physical activity. What's that other one in the SNAP? Smoking. Anyway. Sorry, physical exercise, diet, yeah. So having examples of things ready to go, and like we're going to go have a chat about now, hot topics, because there's always things that are doing the rounds, and especially now's about the time that they write those questions. So hot topics of what's going on in public health, which may sneak their way into exams. They may not. Every now and then you feel like, I've been certain there's going to be an evaluation question for years now. There hasn't been one since I think the year before you sat even. There certainly wasn't one the year before me. There wasn't one my year and there wasn't one last year. So we were all like, yes, there's going to be an evaluation question, and there wasn't. So look, you never know. But yeah, good to have a bit of a feel for what the hot topics are that are going around, and just to have done a little bit of reading around them. Practice. We've already touched on this, but just practice. So, like I said, we were doing questions from sort of January, February, but probably from about April, May, we were doing weekly sessions at work with Simon mostly, and that's what I did with the Victorian candidates last year, and ramped it up as we got closer to the exam. So on my Saturday morning sessions, we started out just doing one question each, but you need to also practice your prep. So practice timed prep and timed practices. And I can't stress the timing of the preparation enough. Practice actually writing what you will write in the exam. You get a bit of paper per question. So practice writing it on an A4 piece of paper. So you'll get an A4 piece of paper with the question written on there. You want to write all that. What I did was wrote what I wanted to talk about on that A4 bit of paper. So practice how you want to do that. Speaking to people who took more than one go to get through the exam, one of the common things that comes out is that they ran out of prep time, and they had 5 or 6 questions really well prepped and the other 3 questions almost not prepped at all because they ran out of prep time. So my tip for that would be really be strict with yourself for timing. And time yourself. Use a timer. Use your phone. Use whatever. You're not allowed to use your phone in the exam. We found out quite late where the best place to get timers is. I will tell you the hot tip. T2. Tea timers. If anybody knows anyone who's obsessed with tea, my husband's best friend is. All the obsessive tea people have timers for their tea, for how long the tea needs to brew for. That's the timer you want for your exam, because they're a nice little size. They're not a phone, and then you'll get used to using the timer. So be strict around your prep time, and practice prepping. Practice prepping full exams, or at least full half exams, but I would say full exams. Give yourself, get an 8-question set together, or swap with your friends, give it to each other so you don't know what the question is coming, so you can't semi-cheat in your own head, and give yourself that 45 minutes and just get your prep done. So what we were doing towards the end is we were practice prepping a full exam, and then we would each do 2 or 3 questions, and then come really close to the end, we probably did maybe 3 or 4 full exams each, just to get used to that timing of stuff. So, the other thing that I used to do, sitting on the train, I'd just write out frameworks. Just write them down. Just write down whichever things that, what's that question that you did last week that you really couldn't remember your framework for? Right, sit down and write it down with none of your notes there, with anything like that. I used to ride to work, so I would just sit there on my bike and just regurgitate frameworks in my head over and over and over again. Most of these tips came from Simon, by the way, so I can't actually take that much credit for them, but he's not allowed to give them to you this year because he's an examiner. So, yeah, again and again and again if you can. In terms of frameworks, there's some that are really clearly obvious that will be the same no matter what you do. So, your environmental health risk assessment one, there's a pretty standard framework that, that's what you'll use. The communicable disease outbreak one, there's a pretty standard framework for that, and that's what you'll use. For some of your, health promotion stuff, needs assessment stuff, there's some pretty standard ones. For other things, it's really kind of up to you to pick and choose as suits you. So, for things like Aboriginal health, there'll be certain ways of going about it that works for you that you can remember, and that might be different to someone else. Policy was the same. I found, myself and the 3 people I did most of my study with all had slightly different frameworks for that. One of the things I would recommend in your practicing as you're practicing questions is like Julia said, you don't need to say, I'm going to use this framework, but signposting or flagging as you go through things, having not been an examiner, but sat through lots of people practicing exams questions, it's a lot easier to follow where they're going if you just do a little signpost of what step in the process you're doing now. So yeah, frameworks, there's some standard, there's some that you will need to sort of tweak to suit you. Are you all on the National Dropbox? Who's heard of the National Dropbox? Right. Who's sitting this year who hasn't heard of the National Dropbox? Okay, good. We will figure out how to get, I'm shit at technology, excuse my French. Somehow I managed to get access to it. We'll, if you, perhaps we'll get in touch with Rachel and make sure that everybody who's sitting has access to the National Dropbox, because that has a wealth of shared resources, frameworks, practice exam questions, various other, I think there might even be links to the old teleconferences. So there's lots of stuff on there. At some point I will get around to uploading my own frameworks on there too. Multi-part questions. They are a new thing from the last few years. There's not as many practice exam questions around about them, but they are an increasingly common thing. I think there was at least 3 in my exam. One of them being an absolute doozy around Aboriginal youth suicide, developing a health promotion policy, and doing a comms strategy and managing a slightly off-kilter minister at the same time. One of the EPI questions, I think, had 3 parts to it. So these new sort of hybrid questions, often, particularly like that Aboriginal health one, I had to sort of mesh 2 frameworks. So have in your preparation, try and have a think about, what if I got a 2-parter around this? You're not going to be able to do some of your really giant frameworks. You're going to have to really abridge them and then do an abridged one for whatever the second part is. So that's another thing to have a think about. Make sure you've got a structure for a plain language question, because the plain language is the thing that you can't possibly have gone across all topics for plain language. So if you've at least got, and not a framework, but like a 2 or 3 part thing, right? This is the first thing that I'm going to do for plain language. This is the second thing, and this is the third thing, because you will almost certainly get something that you've not considered for your plain language. And I got food security, and I hadn't even thought about that at all. But because I'd been doing so badly in my plain language questions all the way up to it, I got to the point where I'm like, actually, I just need to have a structure. So I break this down and don't start faffing. And I think that's probably what got me through. We talked about using reading articles. The conversation and places like that are really good for sort of having experts in a field write an article about what they're an expert about, but aimed at a lay audience. And that's the kind of stuff that is really useful for topics that you might not have considered that might come up. That's the other thing. Beware your pet topic. Do not assume anything. So in my case, that's communicable diseases. So I, early on, had a terrible habit of launching straight into the really complex stuff and actually forgetting the really basic things that you need to do at the beginning, that you just assume, oh yeah, that's I've already done that. Mm-hmm. But if you haven't said that you've done it, in the examiner's head, it's not done. So even for your pet topics, make sure you've got a framework and a structure, because it's really easy to forget about the things that you assume are done early on in a piece of work, that are the first probably 3 or 4 marks of the question, because they're the basics that need to get done before you can move past. Technique-wise, the things that were told to me that I think were really useful is, in opposite to what you are told mostly about public speaking, which is go slower than you think you need to, speak very clearly. You need to learn to talk fast. If you're going to get everything out and do well in this exam, you need to learn how to speak quickly but clearly. But you actually do need to talk fast. And I spoke at about this pace for most of the exam, and it was almost a constant stream of talking for the exam. In order to get everything out. And even then, in the second set, I still ran out of time, and did my last question in maybe 5 minutes, but had been very deliberate about leaving my pet topic to the end and knowing that I could race through it. So consider switching things around to suit your timing. In the first set, I left the question that I was least sure about to the end, because I knew I wasn't going to do so well on it. So you can switch things around for different reasons. Don't delay at the beginning. So rookie mistake is that everybody spends way too long doing the preliminaries, way too long doing your stakeholder list, doing all of that kind of stuff. bang through that. If you are taking any longer than a minute or a minute and a half to get through that, who's my team, who are my stakeholders, all of that kind of stuff, no more than a minute and a half at absolute max for that. Then you need to get into the meat of the question. So if you're getting to 2.5 minutes and you're still talking about stakeholders, that's too long. So hurry yourself along. And this is why you need to practice, and you need to practice with people who can say, you were still doing this at 3 minutes. This is where you were at 6 minutes. This is where you were at 8 minutes. I suppose that's the other thing about your group. Be harsh. It's not fun. It's not nice being what feels like being mean to people that you know and you like and you work with and what have you. But actually, if they've done really badly on that, I mean, don't be mean, but be honest. These are the things that could have, I didn't understand, or you could have said clearer, or that, you need to be honest in your feedback of people, because that's actually the only way they're going to get through it. Learn how to sound confident, and Julia touched on that as well. There's those of us who could talk the leg off a horse. A colleague of ours, the chief health officer, does media interviews. He just pops off the train and gets on the phone and does an interview with, John Fain or someone, and pops back on the train. And there's no way in hell I could do that. But he's one of those people who's just confident at public speaking all the time and sounds confident regardless of what he's talking about. There's other people at the absolute other end of the spectrum who, it doesn't matter how much they know about a subject, they sound nervous, get nervous. And, I've sat in interviews with people who've been my employee for 12 months or 18 months. And I'm like, I know you know this. I can think of 6 examples where you've done this thing really well. But they get so flustered that they just freeze up and sound like they don't know what they're talking about. It's a learned skill for most of us. And that's something that you need to practice. Sounding like you know what you're talking about. Even if you don't think you do know what you're talking about. And you will be knowing what you're talking about, but make sure you sound it. We talked about signposting and flagging. One more technique thing that I found worked for me, but may or may not work for you, is had my 5 minutes per question and I gave myself 5 minutes. So up to you whether you utilise this or not, but in that 45 minutes, I would say give yourself 5 minutes per question. Use your timer. When it gets to 5 minutes, it doesn't matter how much of your framework you've got down, move on to the next question because you've got something down. You do not want to get to the end of that prep time and have nothing down for 2 or 3 of the questions. So be really strict about that. How I did it was when I wrote my frameworks, I had the 8 or 9 main dot points for each frameworks, and then I had an expanded bit down below. But what I made sure was absolutely in my head always for all of those frameworks for those 8 or 9 points. So in my prep time, I would write each of those 8 or 9 headings, and then with whatever time I had left, start to populate dot points underneath those headings. But if you've got those 8 or 9 main points, at least that's a little trigger for what you need to get through in that question. And you can, if you're 6 minutes into a question and you're up to dot point 3, you need to hurry yourself up a bit. So yeah, that was my technique for questions. The national Dropbox we talked about, done the assessment. I think that's about it. Yep, I can't think of anything else. So should we have a talk about potential, or do you want to do questions first? Yeah.
Can I ask you 2 questions? So one of them is very specific. This T2 timer.
Oh yeah, I didn't have one. Someone else had one, and we were like, "Where'd you get that? I've been looking for them for ages." I went to Officeworks and Kmart and everyone. They're like, "No T2."
So yeah. I get when you're in your prep and it kind of like, I guess it's like an egg timer and it pings and you move on.
Yeah, well, we didn't pick it. No, you just need to be looking up and down at it and know.
So it's just a timer that you're watching.
It's just a timer that you're watching.
And did you use? So then, when you went from the prep time into the actual
exam
time, you've just got it sitting there in front of you.
Yeah.
So but it's not.
I had a digital timer that I reset and just hit go, and then so I knew at this minute mark I needed to be at this point, this minute mark. So you need to be able to mentally keep that.
I thought it was pinging, and I thought that maybe that wasn't.
No, you don't get pinging. There's no pinging. But you need to mentally. That's why, and that's another reason why you need to have done lots of practice questions, because you need to get used to looking down at it and going, "Oh, this is how many minutes in I am of my."
The other question I wanted to ask was around your advice on the plain language questions.
Mm-hmm.
And you mind expanding a little bit what you mean about having something around those questions? Because from my point of view, if you don't know it, you don't, for the plain language questions, you either know it or you don't, because they're so, it's like a definitional answer. So
yeah,
how
but
do
it's
you,
not always. So mine was, can you please explain food insecurity to a group of international aid workers who are not medical? So I was like, oh shit. And how it's related to climate change. Yeah. So, yeah, sometimes you might just not know it and you need to wing whether you know it or not. I think they're moving away from that, and that was the other thing on my thing to talk about. I've heard a rumour that plain language is not a definite any longer. Yeah, was it you that told me? Yeah, someone else.
I definitely checked with the college.
Yeah.
I think somebody mentioned in a meeting earlier in the year that they may, or consider, I think again, assuming a lot, but I think the assumption that, you know, there's an expectation that you use relatively plain language for all the questions, you know, and that therefore there wasn't sort of be a discrete question that was solely plain language. But I think we'd have to clarify with the college, but
if you didn't know the answer to that, what are the kind of, so I understand how frameworks are used for other things, but how, if you don't really genuinely don't know what something is, how do you treat yourself to?
My points were reframe whatever it is that they're asking in as non-technical language as you can. Which is tricky if it's a really technical epi term and you've got absolutely no idea. I think they're moving away from that though. I don't think that that's going, but take out all of the technical language and reframe it in a way that is not at all technical if you possibly can. And I thought I'd brought my main book in there here, which had lots of examples, but this turns out was my second or third book. Didn't have it in there. So then use an example to explain something. So some people really like using examples that are not at all, that are completely unrelated to the issue. So, you know, cars, or, you know, there's a really common one about incidence and prevalence and people who've ever bought Jeeps or people who currently own Jeeps and that kind of thing. And so sometimes that works, but I think you need to be a bit flexible around that. Sometimes actually using a health example is the most appropriate thing. And then from recollection, my final bit was go back and A, reiterate it, or like do a little summary, but B, check for their understanding at the end, because actually if they think you've not explained it at all really well, they will come back and ask you further questions.
That food security example is actually a really good one. I can't recall that any of the candidates we saw were across like that, what food security is, had learned to definite, but it's the sort of thing you can get a reasonable mark by being logical.
Yeah.
Food security, food sustenance, the populations, whatever, security, where does food come from? What, you know, the growing, the distribution, the transport. Like, if people were able to come at it by breaking down meanings of those words and then talk about it in reference to climate change, which most people had done a lot of thinking about. So even though you just go, food security, what the hell is that? That's not a concept I'm familiar with or talked about. Most people could come at something that we were able to give them marks for. So even if it's a term, and I agree, technical epi terms is not the same kettle of fish, but if it's a sort of jargon sort of term that you don't know exactly what it is, it might come from health promotion or something you're not familiar with. Sometimes just being sensible about what you think it might mean is going to get you smart.
And so, to be honest, I panicked when I saw it. I was like, oh, God, I don't know, I've not done any of this stuff. I left that to one of my later prep times. I prepped the questions that I knew well first. So actually, in the beginning of your prep, give yourself a couple of minutes, like 2 or 3, to order what order you want to do your prep in. Logically, do the set that you're doing first though. So don't, even if there's a really crap question in the first set that you've got no idea about, make sure you've got something for that set. They say there's no guarantees that you'll have time in the middle. I still had time in the middle, and I could, you know, populate more the frameworks that I'd done in that middle gap for the second set. So yeah, I panicked and I was like, oh God, I don't know what, but I did exactly what Julia said, like, okay, what are the things that we need to consider for food security? It's having enough food, it's having access to food, it's having money to buy food, it's having food that is safe to eat. I think they were the main points that I used, and it's effectively just thought about what are the things that are going to stop people from getting food. Well, they can't get to them, we can't grow it, they can't afford it, it's not safe to eat. And then thought about all of the ways that climate change could impact that, and talked about that, and that was about it really. Yeah, but I will put up my frameworks on the national thing. It was a bit more logical than that. I just couldn't quite log on to my DHHS stuff today because technology.
I guess this is a question for a non-current examiner. So one candidate could have a framework, and as you say, you can synthesize your own framework, and then another candidate will have their own different framework. How do you qualitatively assess them to pass? It's pretty much the candidate's responsibility to sell that framework and verbalise it for them to get through. Is that?
Well, for most questions, you're wanting to see that an appropriate, safe, comprehensive public health action is happening. So if your framework facilitates that and gets you across all the things you need to do and consider and communicate, then that'll be fine.
You test that compass when you're practicing with other people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this your prep around questions and probing stuff, like is that something you tried and tested with your study groups? Is there a general tenor to the questions? Are they generally just kind of, you said this, please explain, or did you have particular approaches to how you then dealt with them, or are they kind of too random to really prepare?
We did a bit of it when someone had missed something in a question. Not a huge amount, to be honest. I got one or two probing questions on the fourth question of my first set, which is the question that I knew I'd done terribly on, the socioeconomic stuff about cancer, that I'm pretty sure we all came out of it and went, oh God, that was the worst one, actually. That was worse than the Aboriginal health one. None of us had prepared hugely as well as we could have along that. Yeah, but I don't think I got many more questions. Can't remember getting that many other questions. So yeah, no, we sort of just asked questions when we thought people had missed something, But that's another reason why it's good, if you can, to organise in your jurisdiction some formal practice exams. So I think we ran 3 or 4 last year, and just got local public health physicians to sit on the panels, and then that gives you a chance to get used to asking questions. The one thing that was inconsistent in my year, and Simon, please make sure this is consistent, is that for all of my first session, the examiners told me when they were done and wanted me to move on to the next question, and that didn't happen in the second set. So I lost a little bit of time waiting for them to tell me to move on when they were just waiting for me to move on. But in the first set, I'd tried to move on once and they were like, no, we've got a question or something like. So I think some consistency around whether we all fed that back because we all had inconsistent experiences around that, around whether the examiners will move you on, will let you know when they're ready for you to attack the next question, or whether they expect you to just go, would be good.
Was there any publications that you made sure to read consistently, like say the PHAA newsletter or
I'd like to say yes, but I wasn't that organised, to be honest. Probably not a bad idea. I feel like really, really high level journals are probably not as useful in this space, to be honest. It's good to have an evidence base for things, but actually you need a very broad base of knowledge and understanding about things, and you need to be able to explain things in a way, like having a lot of in-depth knowledge about something is actually in some ways a risk, because you risk spending too long on that question, which is specifically why when I got a measles question, I was like, I need to leave this to the end, because if I've got an infinite amount of time to cover a measles question, I will talk about that for half an hour. So But the epi stuff and practicing looking at papers and really going through them for the epi questions is useful. And having said that, the other reason that it would be useful to be looking through particularly public health journals and that kind of thing is if you do enough practice questions and pull enough papers out of it, actually you might get stuff that you've already seen before. So the paper that they put to us for our epi question, I'd already done in a practice exam. So, you know, if you do enough volume of stuff, then stuff actually just repeats itself.
So I don't feel like I'm entirely clear, and maybe it's because it wasn't clear for your year, about the timing in the actual, these 2 30-minute blocks, about how to manage your time around. So it's not clear at the moment about whether the examiners do say that's the end of that question, you move
They
on,
will
or
not.
whether you manage your own
So
time.
ultimately, it's up to you.
Yeah.
If you want to spend 2 minutes on one question and 10 minutes on the next, that's absolutely your right.
Yeah.
So the examiners are there to guide you and support you, and they probably, if they feel you've got no marks on that question and want to move on, might try to prompt you and help you to get something.
Yeah.
So I suppose it is up to you. So that, sorry, I didn't explain that very well. What I meant was I would get to the end of the question, have you got any questions? And they would say yes or no. And I'm trying to remember, I blanked it out. It's one of those, just like childbirth, you forget about it. I just recollect in the first one them sort of saying that they were done, that they were ready for me to, that they would, you know, didn't have anything else to ask. And then I remember there being an awkward pause in at least one of the questions in my second set where I was waiting for them to say the same thing because I'd asked if they'd had any questions. So I think the best bet would be if you're finished, just move on, and they will tell you if they want you to pull back and that they've got another question, I would say.
To spend about 6 to 7 minutes answering each question. Is that about the...
I probably spent 10 on that Aboriginal health question though. So there will be...
Need to be a little bit flexible, but
Yeah.
certainly that's what you have in
Yeah.
And you've got your little you can have a timer in the exam room with you. Yeah.
And the examiners will be watching the clock, so they will know if you've just spent 12 minutes on the first question. And they will that's probably when they will intervene and give you a little hurry up. So that's why it is a slightly dynamic process. It's up to you, but they will try and help you not go seriously awry from the time. And they certainly will stop you when you reach the end.
Yeah. I'll try to give an example. I was a big writer. I've been told that I'm a bigger writer than most, that I wrote more than lots of people did on exam prep, but like this would be an example of how much I would have written per question. Like I'd almost fill a page with writing, but it's whatever works well for you, really. Yeah. Okay, shall we?
I was going to suggest that everyone takes a couple of minutes and writes down and then we might throw them around, but you've probably been thinking about this all the last couple of days, so you might just be able to do it off the top of your head. Start by going around the country. So, state by state. So who's local? Who have we got? Victoria. Okay, hot topics. What's happening in public health in Victoria at the moment?
Flu.
Silicosis?
Silicosis.
Yeah.
Family violence.
Family violence, yeah.
It's bigger in other states, but PFAS and the
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Oh, sorry, I think it's bigger in other states, but PFAS and the firefighting foams and defence stuff.
Lead in water? Oral ulcers. Oral ulcers. Heaters was another one last year.
Yeah.
Was that?
Carbon monoxide leaking heaters. The flesh eating bacteria.
Oh,
Yeah,
everybody
really.
likes it.
Yeah.
In the media every now and then, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
I would hope that's a little bit too jurisdictional specific that it would make it.
Does get mentioned in clinical journals that would be applicable around the place, so I think it's possibly important.
Gender health, and yeah, that's big. It's got a lot of funding.
Stop that me injecting.
We got safe injecting rooms in 2017. They may not react, but they may do.
The testing.
You ever get system level questions, like questions around financial sustainability and healthcare, brain drain and things like that? That's the kind of question.
Quality improvement particularly, so the stuff that we practiced around quality improvement was stuff around, so like the Jarawara stuff, like there's been so for the non-Victorians, Jarawara is, what's the suburb? Western, no, it's
Ararat.
You've got right there. It was a health service in one of the outer western suburbs, which turned out had much significantly higher neonatal mortality and even maternal.
Oh, that was Bacchus Marsh.
Bacchus Marsh. Sounds like it. But systematic review sort of turned up a whole lot of governance issues and that kind of stuff, which pretty much prompted a massive overhaul in the safety and quality space of Victoria. So systems improvement, safety and quality and that kind of thing are really quite big topics that you may well get one on. And it's been, some of the practice questions around that were also applied in the Aboriginal health space as well. So talk about health systems and quality improvement in terms of implementing certain programs.
Tasmania?
Men B vaccine funding. Men B vaccine funding.
Yeah.
Access to abortion services.
Yeah, big
Abortion centres.
the global gender, really.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff coming out of Tassie around housing affordability, housing crisis.
Mainland globe.
South Australia.
No jab, no play is going through Parliament, or it's in sort of a stage at the moment of getting approved or getting reviewed. So
That'd be great. I don't know if they've done it before. That'd be a great job.
Does everybody know what the justice day means?
Sorry, no play or no pay?
Play.
That one, yes, and pay.
No childcare for you.
Pay is federal and that's about central
That's
benefits,
federal,
and
yeah.
play is about being able to be enrolled in childcare. Yeah, so in Victoria, it's been in for a few years. Bloody nightmare.
It'd be great if I mean, yeah. Want a nice ethical lens on that one. WA?
That's only me.
Yeah.
We've got measles in doubly vaccinated people. We've got lots of syphilis in women of childbearing age for the first time, including a couple of congenital cases. There's a lot going on in Aboriginal people once discharged from hospital and linking in with follow-up. And we're also drowning in flu, a season that's way earlier than normal and way more severe.
Yeah, I think if I was writing an exam question, syphilis would be a very hot topic. I mean, had a non-contained outbreak that's continuing to spread. since 2014. Yeah, affecting predominantly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That's a massive failure of public health. What a great exam question.
The only other thing in Victoria that could come up maybe is the Aboriginal Treaty Framework that's coming forward. That could be put into any state or territory.
Could anyone from the NT?
I would have said syphilis.
Yeah.
Asbestos. Mostly infectious diseases, and no disease. Right.
Yeah, we've got a list. After some consultation. MDR Shigella, dengue, we just had a dengue outbreak in central Queensland. Measles as well, influenza. The ageing population and the burden of chronic diseases, because we're one of the most rapidly increasing older person population in Australia, and prisoner health. And that comes into the vaccines access as well, because our prisoners aren't eligible for state-funded vaccines. It's fun. Adani. Adani's not really engaged by public health per se.
Environmental risk assessments.
Definitely, we've got we've got climate change discussions at the higher level, and it all comes through the strategic framework for Queensland. It won't mention Adani though.
Sorry, also in Victoria they just started doing euthanasia workshops for general practitioners.
No. Voluntary assisted dying.
My sister's one of the implementers.
It's not euthanasia. Voluntary assisted dying.
Interesting to see how the states and jurisdictions go, and that could be something that could come up
This week, June 16.
And the two that we had today as well, pill testing and injecting rooms.
New South Wales?
Salmonella enteritis.
Measles is still big, influenza, Legionnaires and cooling tower, the regulation changes that have come up. Also, possibly sexually transmitted infections. We've had a recent change in the Act about disclosure, so that might come up. Environmental, probably PFAS is still something that's still lingering, I guess. Hep C elimination is a big topic as well. There's a lot of funding and put into that. Obesity as well is a priority for what I'm saying.
AMR.
AMR
space
surveillance and governance. New South Wales made CPE notifiable earlier this year. CPE.
And whole genome sequencing as well is a big driver.
Maybe the repeal of the lockout laws in topic
Yeah, there's the ICE, ICE and blood testing.
Like in not health protection stuff, there's lots about childhood obesity and teen policy.
I'm noticing this is a very communicable disease focus group, which is great. Well, my people, but you will have one, maybe two at most CD questions. So just expand what you're thinking about away from CD.
The other thing we've started to get is work from the Health Ombudsman to look at practices in terms of infection control and investigating complaints from the Health Ombudsman.
Comments, Simon? That's something we're seeing a lot of in Victoria at the moment. And what about if we move to the national level? Health priorities.
something different?
This isn't probably the most productive comment, but I felt like with the populism and the focus on jobs and what happened with Adani that drove probably the Liberals getting in, I feel like almost public health and setting a big agenda in public health at the national level has almost been put on the back burner, that any kind of big policies getting put forward and supported perhaps may not actually be happening, and things might just have to be happening in the background for a little while. Yeah.
Fairly political. Maybe the topic is advocacy, and how do you get those things to the front of mind politically?
So we're from ACT and have
Sorry, I didn't get all the way around, did I?
I don't know if Miranda has anything to add, but she's
Add pill testing, blue-green algae, air quality.
and also death cap mushrooms in the ACT, and that's often related to communication in Asian populations. So there's language barriers there, and for us it's a significant and life-threatening thing we have to work with.
What was it called? Sorry?
Death cap mushrooms.
Death cap.
They're very poisonous mushrooms, which also resemble mushrooms that are often eaten by Chinese communities, and they're so similar looking. It apparently takes an expert to be able to distinguish the two. And so with migrant communities that come in, people often are out collecting wild mushrooms, and they ingest these and they have toxic effect. They die from ingesting mushrooms. So we do a lot of work around trying to communicate effectively the risk to these communities.
Could there be questions about the geography of our place that we even forget where territories are? As a rural health commissioner, there's politically there were some statements made around rural health workforce. Is that something that could come up as a national public health?
National alcohol policy coming around. Yeah, maybe not a draft strategy.
Gambling is one of the things I
Yeah,
had on my
gambling.
gambling.
NTIS role like
NDIS. And that's, you know,
Yeah.
you will get a policy question here, right?
Yeah.
And NDIS is a good one. And evaluation, so anything that's being rolled out or may be rolled out, you know, creating evaluation plan and stuff. My policy question was about implementing safe ingesting rooms. Putting that policy through. Cracker that's always on the radar is mandatory vaccinations for whichever population, children or healthcare workers or aged care workers or any of those kinds of things. Anything mandatory is always the social determinants of health and socioeconomic considerations. That was my biggest rollout. There was a question about it's a quasi-social question, so being aware of that. Make sure you cover health promotion and every angle that you can come across it from, but you know, it's most certainly going to be there'll be a health promotion in some description. Ours was couched with professional health question. Could you do a health promotion question, mental health promotion question?
Sorry, can you speak up a bit? I'm struggling.
Sorry, make sure you're really up with your health promotion frameworks. And then we can just reel off examples.
Has there been a sugar tax question yet?
Because they went for a while.
Another issue that's come up in South Australia and sort of intermittently, and I know it's been addressed in other jurisdictions as well, but it probably is also a useful one, is the possibility of mandatory drug and alcohol treatment for young people. That's probably, sorry, I was only thinking of that because I was then thinking about some of the issues around incarceration as well as it's a public health issue too.
Welfare cards could be another public health issue.
Yeah,
Policy
basics
thing
card.
to analyse or evaluate or implement. Welfare cards. So some states, WA particularly, a couple of others have trialled
cards where people get pay cards and they can only go to certain shops to spend their welfare money.
I think income management is probably.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Mandatory reporting. Some states and territories have done different legislation around that.
Of doctors or of
Well, I guess health doctors. I guess it's yeah.
Legalising cannabis.
Medicinal cannabis.
Maybe the My Health record.
That's good. Yes.
Maybe it's easier to tell us what's not one. What's not in the exam?
We have no idea what's in the exam. So no, we haven't even been written.
But I think so the My Health record, obviously that's been a schmozzle in all sorts of ways in terms of, people being concerned about security of their information and heaps of things. But I know that, I think it was Joe talked about the shared electronic health record, and that has been amazingly useful for anyone who's worked in the Northern Territory. And so I think, also, that would be a great question around, the usefulness of something like that in, mobile populations, English as a second language, all sorts of, and consent things. So I guess, thinking about the positives and where it might have been used successfully as well as the negatives, yeah.
Screening, the other thing that hasn't come up, there's often, that could be cut in many, many ways. There's the existing evidence-based screening programs, but there's often, a classic is, there's another push to put prostate screening as standard. I would recommend
Lung
as a
cancer
specific
screening,
topic.
ovarian cancer screening.
Yeah, one, when not to screen, have that sorted in your head about when actually we shouldn't be implementing screening programs as well as when we should. Diabetes screening,
And the national bowel cancer screening program is now finally fully rolled out.
The consequence of genetic testing are as implementation in new technologies or in public access to them and communicating that information affects.
Something like a health technology assessment perhaps, which is, sorry, you reminded me with the genetic thing, because things like, one example I can think of was, use of antenatally of like rhesus factor testing and,
senior management.
So, so anyway, health technology assessment would be a good thing to practice as well.
Trisomy 21 screening as well. There's a better test that's now privately available, but it's not publicly funded. Those sorts of health equity issues around screening.
Approving anything on the PBS, has that always come up, that question about pharmaceuticals?
you need to know the people.
Yeah.
You need to know the TGA PBS processes. Yeah.
Emergency management.
Yeah.
Give us like
Came up last year.
a framing for that. Like it must probably not conflict, might be natural disaster. How would that question come up?
There's the prevent, prepare, respond. Oh God, yeah, help me. Prevent, prepare, respond, recover. Between responding and recovery. Give the RRR, the aims thing. So that's what I would use because I'm from Victoria and that's what we do. Although they have moved to all hazards, all agencies. But that's a little bit too general. There's not enough dot points.
What's the third R?
Respond.
Relief.
Relief, recover.
Yeah.
That's it. Relief is in between responding and recovering. Yeah. So that's a nice good one to. There's not too many dot points to remember. Don't ever forget comms, guys. So for those of you who've not worked in government, do not ever forget comms and media, at the beginning and at the end. You can never bring comms in too early for any doing like environmental health stuff, your communicable diseases, even your policy stuff. You can never bring comms and media in too early, having them briefed, and that's actually a practice as well as it. But I am on first name terms with our comms and media team that have been since about 5 minutes after I said it.
You know how you mentioned your list of stakeholders, and in some areas you probably know the relevant organisations and stakeholders, but if it's an area where you really are just pretty desperate for names and you don't know the names, how do you kind of...
Government, non-government, health.
Okay.
Governing bodies, so you can be general like that.
Yeah.
Community, activist group, that's the word, advocacy groups, and media. So you can be, you can be generic like that. If you don't know who they are, you just say, I would identify that, do a stakeholder mapping exercise and identify the stakeholders at these levels. We'll stop at the story. If they think you haven't gone enough into your stakeholders, they'll tell you at the end. You're better to just reel that off quickly, get through the actual proper bulk of your question and have some time at the end for the examiners to say, have you got any other stakeholders you'd like to mention? But if you miss half your environmental risk assessment because you spent 5 minutes talking about stakeholders, you've failed the question.
I suppose we should talk a little bit about our regional and global health priorities. Climate change is the obvious one. I think that situation, the increased desperation of that situation, I would suspect may need still a sitter to be an exam question. Yes, I think that's really good. That vaccine hesitancy.
Something, maybe around biosecurity or, there's return travel, but traveller issues, but then also, pandemics or sort of
depending on who's writing the question and who's going to what conferences, to global health security conferences next week, where they might be examples to come out of that. And the JEGs have all been happening in the last year or two regionally, so the joint evaluation groups of our entire region's international health regulations preparedness. Ours was last year or the year.
Anything that's got a global elimination strategy. I talked about Hep C, but cervical cancer is also, there's a draft coming out for consultation as well.
TB, big one.
And actually sustainable development goals, which,
reference
reference AMR's big one internationally.
Pollution, international, and it's certainly in our region.
Displacement and migration.
Emergencies of international concern.
But we've got someone who works in real-time prescription monitoring in Victoria, which is something that I don't think we've done well yet. That's a technological solution to it. TGA, obviously.
The blood bank?
Blood bank, there's quite a few public health questions in blood bank. And that's where the infection prevention stuff, a lot of that comes in there. It's about safety and potential exposures and that kind of thing. Blood bank about CJD patients, about, we've had big Hep A outbreaks. Hep A is another good one from a CD perspective. There's been massive outbreaks in the last few years, particularly in Victoria and New South Wales, and it crosses, it's crossed from men who have sex with men to IV drug users and then obviously into prisons and into major food outlets as well. So that's, is it an STI, is it a bloodborne virus, is it a vaccine preventable, is it all of the above? So it ticks many boxes.
So like in international health at the moment, so universal health coverage.
non-notifiables?
I don't know. Whether that would, as in, make a policy to make something notifiable.
Group-based trip.
Yeah, there's some that are sort of up for discussion at the moment.
I think group-based trips soon to become naturally notifiable.
Yeah.
It's not a bad first question. Yeah. Question is that why would you make it be nationally notifiable? What are the advantages and disadvantages?
Sorry, ask another question. It's super helpful to know what's going on in all the other jurisdictions, but do you find that when the questions are set, they have to be not jurisdictional because it's unfair? So if there's a question that's only really relevant to Victoria, how does that affect people? Does everything end up being more on a national level?
Look, I think that would be a consideration in setting the question, but again, it's about you guys all having the fundamental principles to tackle a wide range of public health issues. That's much better than an example is grounded in reality than made up. So usually the questions will come from somewhere. They'll have to be somewhere around the country or the world. So it's sort of unavoidable, I think. Like that you may end up with slight jurisdictional ban.
Often your Aboriginal health question is going to be about remote Aboriginal communities.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's not going to be an issue for Victoria or Tasmania ever. You need to know about that stuff. Sometimes a question might come up that has been covered more in one state than the other already.
And sometimes those questions are like, for example, I think it's supposed injection drug question you had your year. It was, the examiners all know that those in New South Wales are more likely to be across this because there's already an established one. So they will take that into consideration when they're listening to your answer about people who have more practical experience or have seen that policy in action compared to other people who kind of perhaps from a more first principles idea. So try to be fair.
Practically speaking, is it all in the same venue? How many people approximately do it? Is it the same panels that see everyone?
Yeah, well, vary year to year. How many people in the city? I believe it can move around, but I think this year I think it's going to be in Sydney again at the College of Physicians office. They'll let you know, I think it's at least 6 weeks before your exam, what session you're in, what day. As I said, they will encourage you to book a flexible airfare for that. And
Fly on the day of your exam, just don't do it.
Talk
about the money.
Yeah. And the examiners, as you've heard, will vary from year to year. They try to get a balance of people from around the country and women, different experience, content areas. No two exams are going to be identical for that reason, but they certainly, that's why all of the exams are standardised all of the.
Do you choose which of the 4 questions go into the first set, or do they tell you?
This is your first set, this is your second set. You can do that for and whatever order you want, and that for and whatever order you want, but no two examiners are, but the sets are set.
Sorry, last question. As an examiner, do you have like a list of model answers or something that go in front of you, or you just kind of generally listen for?
We do.
Yeah. So we will think very close, I said, over time to make sure that the errors rise up and errors make them. But they are just a starting point. So as I said, if you come out with an out-of-the-box, wonderful way of tackling this question that's better than what we've got on the paper, we'll give you due acknowledgement for that. So it's designed to the core fundamentals we were looking for to convince us that you will be a safe, effective practitioner. So there's room within that from getting across the broad concepts and ideas. If you tackle it in a slightly different way that doesn't exactly meet the wording of this dot point, it doesn't matter.
And I was going to say, don't be afraid to talk about what happens in your jurisdiction or what you've had experience with.
So, you know, it's absolutely fine to say, you know, and like in the measles question I got, in my jurisdiction, we would do this. We would send the sample here, we would then do this. We're centralised, so we would do X, Y, Z. You know, probably it would happen completely differently in different jurisdictions. So it is okay to say, you know, this is how our policy cycle works. This is how our, and we would talk to head office because that's where, they make those decisions there. So it's okay to look at it from what your experience or current situation is.
Draw a line there. Thank you very much. We enjoyed the event.
I will send Rachel's here.
I was going to say with the Dropbox, that's something that all the state trainee reps are meant to, all their state reps about. So contact your state rep.
Okay, good.
And also there's not much in it and there hasn't been much and you put in it for a few years. So feel free to populate it.
Extra stuff in.
Yeah.
The only thing I'd add to all this wonderful, really fantastic session today is that the college does run some teleconferences because of the occurrence in the exam this year. And the first one of those teleconferences answers all the really technical final questions about when and where and how. Yeah. So those ones that we don't necessarily know the answers to, they will all be answered for people sitting the exam this year in plenty of time. So, thanks to Julia and Annaliese again, and we'll let you go. And again,